John Bannon has been publishing magic almost as long as I've been alive. He's put out a number of awesome books, including but not limited to Impossibilia, Smoke and Mirrors, Dear Mr. Fantasy, High Caliber, Destination Zero, Mentalissimo, and now in 2022, Queen Spirit. All of you erudite magicians know that I'm a pretty positive guy, but honestly, this book left me a little disappointed, and I want to talk to you about why. Before I get too far into that, let me say that this book does have a lot of really redeeming qualities, so let's not get too carried away with negativity. But it's pretty far from what I've come to expect from a John Bannon book. Let's talk a little bit about the technical specifications of the book. It's self-published, and it shows, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. It is hardcover and just about 70-ish pages. There are 8 tricks in the book, or should I say variations on a theme, and that theme being the 7-card assembly. Now, I know a lot of very knowledgeable magicians and feel that as an erudite magician, I know a thing or two as well, but I have never heard of the 7-card assembly, and neither had most of my erudite friends. It's basically an ace assembly, and in John Bannon's case, he uses queens, hence the name. But regardless of whether you use aces or queens, the cards all gather together after being put into different piles. Where this differs from the classic ace assembly that most of us know and probably perform is that it doesn't use 16 cards, it uses the barest minimum possible, your 4 money cards and 3 other indifferent cards. It is for sure a minimalist approach, and I feel that that is slightly reflected in the book's attributes itself. Because of the subject, there's not a lot of variation in the book. You're getting the variations on the theme. The author expects you to choose from the variations to put together your own, say, 3-piece routine, 4, 5, whatever you want. Of the 8 tricks in the book, 6 of them actually cover this minimalist approach. One of the tricks uses a more classic 16-card approach, with each one of the queens disappearing one at a time to rejoin the leader pile. And finally, the last trick in the book is an ace cutting style routine that looks similar to Gary Ouellette's 3-Second Wonder. So let's talk about the things that I liked and believe that you'll like about this book. The tricks are classic Bannon. You'll discover offbeat timing that will surprise and delight your participants. If you don't know what I'm talking about with John Bannon, he loves to take the timing that one expects in a trick and somewhere along the way move that timing up, so that the climax arrives sooner than you would predict it would. Not only that, this is actually a very interesting premise. To take that ace assembly with the 16 cards and to cut it down into just 7 cards really is an exercise in minimalism and figuring out what can work with so few cards. I've always liked Bannon's writing style, so that's another thing to like about this book. He brings that same conversational style to this book and uses a lot of interesting words that make it seem very erudite. Plus, sometimes you just want that variation on a theme that John seems to be so good at doing. Speaking of being erudite, the crediting in the book is pretty good for what it is. He generally gives you the starting point, the trick that he read about or was working with when he got the inspiration for the trick he's describing here, as well as some of the moves, and a lot of this comes from his older material, so he'll give himself credit as well as the people who inspired him. And as a typical hallmark of a John Bannon card book, most of the material is pretty easy to do. There are definitely no knuckle busters. You're only going to need to know a few basic sleights like double turnovers or block push-offs. The Elmsley count will come in handy, but there's absolutely nothing outside the grasp of the inspired beginner or intermediate magician. Most of the tricks are fairly brief, and I like that because it actually encourages you to go through with cards in hand. He shares the effect through the eyes of your audience, and then gets right into the method and walks you through so that you can be performing these materials in next to no time. These are some good tricks, and there are a lot of nice moves. There are reliances on discrepancies, which make it interesting and stimulating from an intellectual perspective. He does discuss a lot of good theory in here about using that minimalistic approach. The trade-offs involved between predictability and impossibility. There's definitely some good reading. Let's also talk about a few of the things that I didn't like, but before we get into that, let me tell you about one more thing I do like, and that's the sponsor of this video, Don's Magic and Books. I love the fact that Don offers fair pricing for some hard to find and out of print books. If you're a John Bannon aficionado, you know that a lot of his books go out of print fairly quickly, and Don has had his fair share of those books come through his shop, where he's offered them back out to the magic community at a very reasonable price. And he will have this new book once it is stocked to smaller dealers. Regardless of what you're looking for, if you use the code SNOW at checkout this week, you'll save 10% off almost everything on his website. And if you're in the United States buying $20 or more of media items, then you will qualify for free shipping. It's a pretty hard deal to beat, and I'm so pleased that Don has partnered with me to bring this to you, my Erudite viewers. So head on over to his website, donsmagicandbooks.com, and start taking advantage of the savings right now. Let's talk a little bit about why I feel the need to share what I didn't like about this book. One of the biggest issues that I had with this book is that I felt it needed some third parties involved. By that, I mean an editor, a designer, etc. The layout on this book is really not what I've come to expect from a modern magic book. There's a fair bit of white space in this book, especially for something as short as the 70 pages that it is. You'll notice in some of the overlays that I'm sharing, the pictures are isolated with no text next to them. It's almost like the entire thing was laid out in an older version of Microsoft Word. Aesthetically, some of the numbers next to the pictures just seemed too close to the picture itself and maybe should have been overlaid in a white font or whatever color would stand out on these black and white photos. The photos are adequate, if unspectacular. There are plenty of them to describe the moves, but like I said, they end up creating a lot of unused space in the book, but perhaps could have led to a longer page count. The one photo that's pretty unforgivable in my mind is the cover photo. It's been stretched well beyond its intent, and you can actually see the pixelation on the cover, which is very disappointing because the first thing that you notice when you look at a book is the cover. I think that if John had had someone like a design or cover expert involved, they would have helped him to see this and rectify it to get up to his normally high standards. There aren't any real scripts given with any of the tricks, and there's a reason for that. It's because most of the tricks are so quick, there's not much really to say. Now, of course, I know that as an erudite magician, you'll be coming up with your own presentations, but the basics that are given just don't seem like there was a lot of thought involved. And because each one of them are derivative, they all have almost exactly the same script. This premise is a kind of story trick about the girl band getting back together and calling and texting and posting on Facebook together, and the band is back together. Something like that. John tells you early on that he's not really a fan of story tricks, and that he really only likes them when they're making fun of magicians who tell story tricks. So in a weird sort of way, it feels very meta and a little bit confusing as to why almost all of the tricks would use this presentation. The language is very casual. In fact, there are LOLs written within the text. It's just very surprising and not as professional as what I was expecting. When you look at the overall size of this book with the 70-ish pages, the plethora of white space, the derivative nature of the tricks, and the same script given for each one, it feels like this should have been part of a larger book. And that's the way I think it would have provided the most value. At $40 for 8 tricks, most of them being derivatives of the same thing, this doesn't feel like such a bargain, especially given the production values. I recognize that inflation has increased the cost of everything, but when you go back and look at all of the older John Bannon books and what was charged for them upon release, most of them had 25, 30, 40 tricks, and they weren't that much more than this booklet. I'm personally still a fan of John Bannon, and I look forward to any books that he puts out in the future, but I needed you to know that I was disappointed with this one. If you'd like to see what an amateur is capable of publishing without getting involved with a major publisher, be sure to check out this video I did. And if you'd like to see a glimpse into more of a standard John Bannon work, be sure to check out this video. As always, my friends, I appreciate you watching, and until next time, keep reading.